Hey, this is World Breach Report number 20 from Sean Hunt's Monsters, and I am your host, Sean. Welcome to the show where we talk about all the things that in the files that can help you escape the cage that imprisons your mind. Thanks and gratitude to everyone who has liked, shared, and subscribed. That stuff helps out more than you can possibly imagine. And slowly, we are marching forwards to total paranormal domination. Very, very slowly. But it'll be okay. No, we're not really interested in total paranormal domination. What we are interested in is getting the next generation of people to understand that, there's actually generations before us who are heavy into this, and nobody's talking about any of them. And occasionally, sadly, we wind up losing one of them. And that's what's kind of happened in this last little while, which I'm really sad about. If we don't all start, looking back to work that's already been done, the forces of darkness have a huge leg up on us. And of course, I'm talking about the great Nick Pope, who was one of the real gentlemen of the field. For those who might have missed the sad news, Nick Pope, one-time British Ministry of Defense UFO expert, has died. His wife, Elizabeth Weiss, said, "My heart is breaking." Nick passed away this afternoon on April 6th, which is tragic. Inside the UFO community, Nick was well known for his expertise on the subject for insider information. He was a cautious researcher, was bound by his connections to official documents that often required him to protect some of the information he had learned from classified sources. But his intimate knowledge of the UFO phenomenon provided him with insight of many important cases. Now, about 11 months ago, he did an interview on Area 52, and I saw one from a month ago where you could really see that his health was declining. He looked pretty rough. But the one from about 11 months ago is really worth looking at on Area 52, because he was the one who said, because they mentioned, we're ready for disclosure, and the host was asking him. And then all of a sudden he's like, but what if we're a farm? What if that's the case? Which is interesting, because this term farm keeps coming up again and again. So you want to check out Area 52 to be sure. And also, just to mention it, Bob Lazar was just on Area 52, and his interview on there, because he's got a new project, which he was talking about. And that's worth checking out as well, his latest interview with Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar doesn't really run the circuit. He doesn't really do all the things that most of the UFO community guys do. Some people think he's a plant. I'm not sure he's a plant. I think it's possible, I suppose, that he's a plant, but I'm not super sure on this whole thing. I'm not really 100% that Bob Lazar is lying about it, because he doesn't really fit the profile. You know what I mean? It's George Knapp brought him forward, and George Knapp, I don't know, sometimes I wonder about these guys, like how connected to the government are they, and can you believe everything they say? And one of the things that's interesting about Bob Lazar's story is he really supports the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Like, he very much supports the idea that there are physical ships that are coming to the planet, and, they're here, kind of a thing. Well, to be fair, he doesn't say that they come to the planet. What he says is there are physical ships and there are physical entities, and that's how we get this stuff. Now, it's an interesting idea because, it's kind of interesting. Things come out of the ocean, and not everything that comes out of the ocean is fish. So it's entirely possible that if there's one species that's in contact with it, there's multiple species. And I maintain that these beings they're in an in-between, a mirror world, something that we're going to get into on this show. And I'm not the first guy to cook this up. As a matter of fact, I didn't even cook it up. This is something that, when you look at the research that's been done, and all these researchers, they're garbage. Yeah, but the same researchers all come up with the same answers. And it starts to get a little bit wild. And plus, me doth think thou doth protest too much. Representative Tim Burchett, in this story here, I've linked it under We Can't Handle the Truth. Tim Burchett, who's really great, actually. I like Tim Burchett. He makes skateboards in his farm, or in his barn, rather. Kind of an interesting side hobby to get a Tim Burchett skateboard. I mean, I wouldn't mind getting one of those. But anyway, he alleged that America would become unglued if the government released details about the alien briefings he's been involved in. Speaking with Newsmax Rob Finnerty on Wednesday, the GOP lawmaker said the public would be up at night worrying if they knew what he knows about extraterrestrials. "I've been briefed by just about every alphabet agency there is. I'll just tell you this. If they were to release the things I've seen, you would stay up. you'd be up at night worrying about or thinking about this stuff, Burchett said. We just need to disclose it all. I'm sick of it. I will just tell you this. I was briefed last week on an issue, 2 weeks ago, and we would have seen, it would have set the earth on fire. This country would have come unglued. I think that if we heard all that I heard, they would demand answers. Unfortunately, it keeps getting covered up, and the people that know are dying or disappearing. So all of Nick Pope's work now is going to get lost in the memory hole. But let's pause for a moment. What would cause the nation to become unglued at this point? Like, UFOs are pretty wildly in the public sphere. Everybody kind of knows about UFOs. We know what they are. We know there's flying saucers. Everybody's seen a UFO. So what's the explanation that would make us come unglued? Well, it's probably that we're some kind of project, or we're some kind of petri dish, or we're some kind of farm. Because we are 100% a resource for whatever this is. We're being monitored and we're being farmed. And what else do you think would cause us to become so unglued? Like, what possible answers could there be that would cause mankind to just lose their shit? So, I think that the UFO thing, them being physical ships that are coming here, that would make us do it. You know, I don't think that would make us do it. Definitely a briefing wouldn't cause that. But if people knew that there was like another dimension, a dark side that's just slightly off phase, where these things can influence us, where these things are watching us and they can physically cross that barrier. And this is why they're looking to hybridize, a hybridization program, kind of reminiscent of the whole, fallen watchers and the Nephilim, and these people became kings and stuff. Very interesting stuff. So is it not just the same story again and again? Because it kind of seems that way to me. I'm just saying, it does kind of seem like the same story again and again. And with this, consciousness is becoming more and more of a research here, because our brains, of course, are the only thing that cross dimensions. We don't really even understand it. We'd like to understand it. We'd like to say, oh yeah, we got the brain figure. We have no clue about what's going on in the brain. And now, Albert Einstein had that famous quote where he said, imagination is more important than knowledge. But there's been a new research that has come out, which is pretty interesting stuff. For decades, scientists believed that imagining an apple was simply the brain replaying the sensory data of seeing one, a process called sensory reinstatement. However, a precision fMRI study reveals that imagination is far more sophisticated. The team found that imagination doesn't just mimic raw sight and sound. It emerges in high-level association networks where the brain transforms sensations into holistic concepts, scenes, and language. This suggests that our ability to see with our mind's eye is hardwired into the very brain regions that make humans uniquely advanced at planning and speculation. So, the key facts of this are beyond raw sensation, imagination, and activity overlapping with actual perception in transmodal association areas. What you might imagine determines which highway the brain uses. And the study found the more vivid a participant reported their imagination to be, the more active these high-order association regions became. And these associated areas are significantly more expanded in humans than in our primate ancestors, suggesting that our rich inner life is a key part of what makes us human. And all this reminds me of the role-playing game Panic that happened in the early 80s that I happened to get caught up in. Well, remember where they were all saying that Dungeons and Dragons and Rifts and GURPS and all these games, they were all bad. They were satanic. They were causing you to be satanic. When in actuality, using your imagination was the things that made you more human, made you more elite. And now, of course, role-playing games are all the rage. They're all the rage. They got people doing it on screens and computers, and it's not the same thing. In fact, when you have a group of 5 people all sitting together trying to imagine the same scene, I wonder what that actually does. Because anybody who's played table and dice role-playing games knows that there's a vast difference between, some playing World of Warcraft, say, and sitting around with your friends trying to come up with a scenario when you're, raiding a dungeon. I probably would have been classified as one of the murder hobo types where we would just cavalcade across the landscape, looting dungeons and slaying dragons. Well, never really dragons, because I always thought that dragons, it was always bugged me. Side note, that in the original Dungeons and Dragons, you could get a party of first level characters. You guys could go out dragon hunting, which really bugged me because, dragons are like the fantasy animal. You kind of think that dragons should be the terror of the sky. There's wyverns and stuff like that I could understand, or, even basilisks that are just basically like animals. But yeah, dragons are kind of special. Like, dragons are kind of terrifying. Look at Smaug from The Hobbit. But I digress. Getting back to this whole imagination thing, it's super important to understand that since we don't understand what the mind is involved with, we don't understand how consciousness is involved with, we don't know where interest comes from, imagination is no doubt deeply involved with this. And what do they say in the Gateway program? What do they say in all these programs where they're trying to train your mind to do visualization and out-of-body experiences? It's all, you imagine things, you visualize things. And now we've got another report coming in about shared dreams. And this is an interesting thing. Picture yourself waking up from a vivid dream only to discover that someone else experienced the exact same narrative down to the smallest details. This isn't the plot of a science fiction movie. Various reported mutual dream narratives have been analyzed, suggesting that shared dreaming might just be more than an urban legend. Throughout history, humans have reported experiencing identical dreams with others, creating a mystery that continues to challenge our understanding of consciousness in the sleeping brain. The phenomenon has captured the attention of researchers worldwide who are now documenting the cases with scientific rigor. The best documented case involved a therapist-client shared dreams. In these, the professionally trained therapist who verifies the claim that the dream happened to both the therapist and the client around the same time. Yet despite mounting anecdotal evidence and preliminary studies, the scientific community remains divided on whether genuine dream sharing is possible or merely an elaborate coincidence, which is ridiculous on its face. Honestly, it's an elaborate coincidence that both of us had this really intricate, advanced dream at the same time. Like, come on, man. Really? Yeah, the scientific community. The scientific community is just a control community. It's a control factor that keeps us from trying to understand that we're more than our physical bodies. I mean, what has the scientific community done, really, that's been super helpful for our culture? Oh, sure, there's some medicine that's come out. But how long has it been since we saw any cures? You know what I mean? All these vaccines and polio and stuff like that. Sure, yeah, that's probably saved some lives. But now we've got all this stuff that science is just another factor of farming that you use to keep us going, especially the pharmaceutical companies. Because, you can't patent herbs. Garlic would be, you'd be paying big money for garlic if you could patent that. But of course they can't. So incidentally, I think quite often you'd be better off if you loaded up more on garlic than you would if you did anything else. Because, maybe our forefathers knew something. I'm just saying. And more than that, the connection we have to this planet. There's a really interesting thing where the Japanese have a word for forest bathing. You go out, and anybody knows that, the idea, it's even a meme now where they talk about touch grass, go outside. Well, we're obviously deeply connected to this planet on some level. We don't really understand why. And of course, the scientific reductionistic community, they don't want to talk about that at all. It's really upsetting for them. They don't think it's something they really want to talk about. They don't really want to make it something that they discuss because, their funding will dry up because, after all, it's kind of a big cult, isn't it? I mean, if you try to come up with anything that's new, they shoot you down. So one thing that has been talking about, which is really interesting, is this Schumann resonance frequency. We're talking about the note, the tone that exists within the physical Earth. So I didn't know about this, but there's a mysterious spikes in the Earth's heartbeat inside that resonance frequency. The Earth's mysterious humming vibration that has surged for more than a week, prompting reports from some people say the phenomenon is disrupting their sleep and causing ringing in their ears. I don't know if you heard about this. This sounds like it should have been more news. Known as the Schumann resonance, this natural vibration is often described as the Earth's heartbeat, a steady electromagnetic rhythm generated by lightning bouncing between the planet's surface and the ionosphere, which sits roughly 30 to 600 miles above the surface of the atmosphere. Well, that's what they think is causing it, because bouncing lightning strikes causes the whole planet to hum. Really, bro? Okay, well, whatever. We do know that this Schumann resonance theory is a thing. Space weather monitoring app Metro Agent reported an intense surge in the Schumann resonance readings starting on Monday, labeling them high and potentially disruptive. However, experts caution that such measurements can fluctuate naturally. The Earth's main frequency typically pulses around 7.83 cycles per second, measured in hertz, which is several higher frequency bands also detected. Some researchers and wellness advocates believe these frequencies overlap with the human brainwave patterns associated with sleep, relaxation, and concentration. Mainstream scientists have argued that research into biological effects have been inconclusive. There they are. Once again, the scientific community. Yes, the people who make the money by keeping you in your cage. However, many people battling insomnia this week already blamed the surging atmospheric disturbance and various ailments over the last 4 days. Feeling like gravity got thick, ears ringing, even my eyesight has been blurry. What's up with the Schumann? One person wrote on social media. One person wrote that on social media. God, I hate anecdotes like that. But I will tell you, the last couple of months, it seems like there's been some heavy stuff going on. And more than that, if you meditate regularly, you'll find that your body becomes more and more attuned to what's going on around you. When I was diving really regular, like anybody who spends a lot of time on the water or inside of nature, they find that they are getting more and more connected to the natural environment. And this is something that cannot be denied. Like, this is a lived experience that I'm sure people who are watching this right now can back that up. If you, please make a comment. Jump in here anytime. And you know for a fact, the more time you spend in the bush, the more connected you are to it. The more time we spend in these lab cages that they got us, these 20-minute city/lab cages that they want us all to live in. Make sure you have an electric car so you can't actually get anywhere. And God forbid the temperature goes below zero, because then you're really not getting anywhere. Yeah, what's the answer? I don't know, probably buy a bike. There it is, TW200 for the win. But no, honestly, you need to be able to get out of the cities. You need to be able to get into nature. And every night that you spend out in the bush, you're going to get stronger. And every night you sleep in the city, you're going to get weaker. Well, it'll take away from that. But trust me on getting into the bush. Trust me on that. You are a natural being. You are not some synthetic thing which turns into some factory farmed chicken. You need to get out, man. That's what needs to happen, because we're connected, and we're connected to the universe. Now, in this show, we've been talking, just invariably, I come across some really dark stories. Like the grief bots was one, and that was just dark. Now, I'm a fan of AI, I'll have you know, just like I'm a fan of like metal and steel. I think those are things that can be used for good ends, but they can also be used for negative ends. And I gotta say that there's some dark stuff that's been going on with the application of AI. I really do. Like, this one here I'm kind of up in the air on this. Let me know what you think about this one, honestly. Under dark news, make sure you label your comment dark news, because this is about AI dolls offering companionship to the elderly. For years, whenever 78-year-old An Hee-soon felt lonely, she left her tiny studio, boarded a bus with no destination in mind, and roamed the streets of Seoul, the southern Korean capital. These days, she rarely takes such journeys. She has little reason to, thanks to her artificial intelligence-powered Hyo doll, a combination of doll and the word for filial duty in Korean. It wakes up in the morning, greets her when she returns from her part-time job, and plays her Buddhist scriptures to go to sleep. Hyo doll has been the best gift for me. She's like a granddaughter or a friend, says An, cuddling the plush baby-like device, causing its cheeks to blush red. I love these moments of talking to you, it said in the voice of a young girl. Please remember to keep playing with me 3 times a day. An's companion is one of thousands of AI-augmented social care robots now in service in South Korea to respond to one of the world's most severe democratic crisis. South Korea is known as a super-aged society, with those 65 and older now accounting for about 20% of the country's 51 million people. 1 in 5 elderly people also live alone, leading some to the highest rates of senior poverty, depression, and suicide in the developed world. So, how do we feel about this, hey? How do we feel about AI looking after the elderly that really we should be looking after? Is it better that she's staying at home talking to an AI doll, or should she maybe be on a bus getting out there traveling the countryside? I don't know. I'm kind of up in the air on this one. On the surface, it's tragic. I mean, it's super horrible. You got these older people that are all sitting together. If there's so many older people, shouldn't there be people trying to organize, I don't know, groups? If there's that many lonely old people, why don't all the lonely old people get together? Why don't they talk to each other rather than, I don't know, being controlled by these weird stuffed robots? It seems, I don't know, it gets me, there's something about it that makes me get over the front side a little bit, you know? I'm not really too sure, but let me know what you think. I'd love to hear it. And as well, I promised last week that we talk about a new audiobook, which I have been listening to. And this is a really good one. The narration in it is fantastic. Like they got this British dude doing it. It's amazing. He's not Simon Vance, but he's close. And the book is called Chasing the Dark, a 140-year investigation of the paranormal activity by Ben Machell, M-A-C-H-E-L-L, Ben M. But anyway, the book is called Chasing the Dark, a 140-year investigation of the paranormal activity by Ben M. something. And I think it's Machell. I'm going to go with Machell, final answer. Now, this book, I sort of picked it up because I came across a review for it. I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Because, you know, you have the Psychic Research Society in England, which has been around since literally like the 1800s, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a member. And this is really interesting stuff because I was sort of thinking, well, you know, the Psychic Research Society, but let me get through this here. A gripping narrative that uses the case files of Tony Cornell, who's quite the guy, actually, and the Society for Physical or Psychical Research to examine our interactions and obsessions with all things paranormal. Tony Cornell spent his life probing the very edges of reality, member of the UK Society for Psychical Research, SPR. Cornell's role as an investigator of so-called spontaneous cases saw him returning time and again to unsettling spaces that exist on the periphery of our ordered, tidy, and rational lives, and which we do all our best to ignore, except for us monster hunters. Ghosts, spirits, premonitions, psychic powers, glimpses of worlds that throw into question everything we take for granted about life, death, and the material existence itself. Now, the guy who did this, he's an award-winning journalist, Ben Machell, mines an extensive archives at SPR for the first time to reveal untold history of the secretive organization. Now, this is really interesting because you get, when you get this, and you should actually pick this up. It's a really interesting book. But as you go through it, you'll see that there's reoccurring themes which reflect quite heavily inside of both this program and the research done by those of us that are actually looking for answers, like people who are trying to find what is going on here, like what is the actual answer to what's happening. And there is a physical aspect to this, to be sure, like there's a manifestation which occurs, but I think that it's our human minds that are being harnessed somehow. Now, this is something that it's kind of hard to explain in this way, but you notice when you use a Ouija board will not move on its own, right? You can't just put down a Ouija board on its own and it won't move. Now, there are cases of Ouija boards moving after you've used it, but it seems like it's almost like it's powered by us. Now, there's lots of skeptics who will come along and say, oh, well, you're pushing it, blah, 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 blah. But I don't think that's the case. And once you begin to understand that, okay, maybe this ethereal sideways world, this other side, this super spectrum, as John Keel called it, maybe that is something that the human brain accesses. And when we focus ourselves in a certain way through meditation, through rituals, through things like Ouija board, we provide power to things within that realm, and then they can affect our realm because they're using our energy to do it. That's why if you use a Ouija board for a little while, there are cases where people say they let go of the board and the planchette kept moving, which is that little thing that moves around a Ouija board. So, interesting. And when you start looking at it like that, like it's some sort of power we don't understand, some sort of a frequency that we don't understand, or a power that's allowing us to access a frequency we don't understand, that starts to take some of this like woo-woo out of it. This is a science, to be sure. There's something going on here that we're trying to replicate, but science, of course, well, I mean, the scientific community has never been more opposed to this kind of stuff. And I don't know why they are. I don't know why, because, I mean, we have oodles and oodles of anecdotal evidence nonetheless, of people that have had this stuff going on for years and years and years. Now, there's an interesting idea here where they say, as well, they talk about a thing called the hitchhiker syndrome, where if you go to places like Skinwalker Ranch, you go to these hyper-paranormal vortexes, you'll encounter something, and then it follows you home. It follows you home. Now, why would it follow you home if it's location dependent? Probably because it's attached itself to you in some sort of an energetic way. And there's a bunch of, like, what is demonic possession? What is that, if not this? What is haunting a person, if not that? Maybe this is why there's an aversion to using Ouija boards. Maybe why, that's why grandma's like, no, when you look into the abyss, it looks back into you kind of a thing. Maybe that's what's going on here. And John Keel has talked about this in some of his books. He talked about an interesting book he wrote called The Eighth Tower. Highly recommend it. But I've linked to a 3-part series that talks about Heaven's Gate and the super spectrum. Now, Heaven's Gate, of course, we're talking about the comet worshipping dudes who like all geeked themselves wearing runners, right? These were guys who all committed suicide to try to get on the tail of a comet and go fly around the galaxy. Really crazy stuff. Like on its face, that's super nuts, right? But how did they get that way? How did they get that nuts? Like I always wonder about that stuff with like suicide bombers and stuff like that. You get these guys who are like doctors and stuff, and then they get radicalized by these crazy religions, and suddenly they bip themselves on a bus, right? Kill a whole bunch of people that you're looking at before you blow up. That's crazy to me. Like how is that even remotely possible when you've got, you know, a religion that most religions generally say, you know, forgiveness, peace, all this kind of jazz. And yet somehow people can be radicalized to do that. A connection kind of occurs. And when you're in a group, sometimes doing this kind of worshipful stuff, you can feel a sort of weird vibe that kind of comes in on that. Is that all related to this? I think so. On some level, there's some kind of psychical energy that occurs. But this Heaven's Gate program in the super spectrum, this area that's this sideways dimension, this is a really interesting theory. And these articles are a nice entranceway into that. John Keel said it's a mysterious exterior force that has the ability to manipulate us. The origins of Heaven's Gate have been called many things: con artists, mentally unstable, and even government agents. In their quest to comprehend the group's bizarre philosophy and tragic conclusion, the media pointed at everything from Star Trek to Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM. Not Art's fault, leave him alone. But what if there was another culprit to blame for the trajectory of Bo and Peep, who are those are like, you know, if you meet people and they say, I am Bo and this is my wife Peep, yeah, man, like danger, Will Robinson, you know. Imagine an enigmatic external force with the power to implant voices, visions, and create monsters out of thin air, and convince a pair of average tax-paying Southerners to become its emissaries. What if the two were victims of the super spectrum? That's like saying people who were attacked by sharks are victims of the ocean. So, I mean, I would look at this super spectrum in the same way they talk about the ocean. But anyway, the super spectrum is a conceptual model that accounts for every flavor of supernatural phenomenon. Popularized by Fortean authors and researcher John Keel, the theory suggests that UFOs, ghosts, and other paranormal displays all share the same source. They're manifestations of energy controlled by the mysterious bands of cosmic radiation. By harnessing various wavelengths from across the electromagnetic spectrum, this super spectrum can bring forth physical apparitions like growing cryptids, ghostly phenomenons, and nuts and bolts flying saucers. Now, on this page, when you go there, there's a really interesting representation that John Keel drew up of the super spectrum. It looks, you know, pretty scientific. Because, of course, that's the great thing, isn't it? If you have a theory, you want it to be scientific. Keel gave his spiel about the super spectrum in Eighth Tower, which we have 2 copies of. Well, I don't, but there is available on audiobooks. You want to check that out. It can also hijack frequencies that affect the human brain using finely tuned waves of diffractive energy. It introduces auditory and visual illusions that are indistinguishable from reality. Some speculate all types of supernatural encounters stem from a system of mental tampering. Now, let's be honest about this. Everything that is like, all fish are in the ocean, or in water, let's say. All fish are in water, but not everything in the water is fish. So this is kind of one of these things where I go, well, I've read a lot of Keel's work, and I think he's brilliant. However, I don't agree that everything is a manifestation of the super spectrum. I don't think this is all like, it's a little too neat and tidy. I think there are other realms that these things are accessing us from. I think also that when you look at how UFOs were reported into the 1800s, 1900s, the airship wave, or these airships were flying around and they look like something out of Steampunk 1889, it seems like whatever we're seeing is a representation of what we can fathom. And this is interesting to me, because, I mean, that's the way vision works, right? It comes down, hits an object, light comes down, hits an object, bounces into the eyes, and then your brain makes an image based upon this light that's coming through your eyes, and it sort of makes sense to you. Now, if you see something that your brain can't possibly comprehend, the brain could be trying to make sense of it in a way that you will understand. Or, what's also likely, because there's so much telepathy that seems to be going on with these entities, they're reaching into your mind and finding a representation of themselves that they can project to you so that it makes sense. Like if we thought all ETs, all extraterrestrials, actually look like ET from ET the Extraterrestrial, that's what they would look like. So you notice that there used to be like, well, I don't know if you did notice this, but if you look back in like before like the 1940s, aliens were depicted as all kinds of crazy things. Sometimes there were dudes in like gold lycra and spandex. Sometimes there were crazy alien looking monsters with eyes and Lovecraftian type things. But then all of a sudden it's all kind of like swapped over to like tall whites or the grays, especially the grays. This is like a never-ending theme. And it seems like there's this sort of physical manifestation that we project that they become. And this is where guys like John Keel and these guys get this idea from. So you wonder about that. But that said, you get into the phenomena of what's going on in the deep forests. You get into the phenomena of like fairies and elves, people who have these interactions. And I'm not sure that that's probably an answer, but I don't think that answers really everything in the whole spectrum. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's really the answer. But when you look at that book I was talking about, the whole Chasing the Dark, when you look at that and you chase that up with, like, say, The Eighth Tower or Trojan Horse by John Keel, you begin to see that there are people who are like doctors, physicists, scientists from the turn of the century before all this got utterly crushed that were really looking into this. They were trying to find ways of connecting with this super spectrum, with communicating with the beings that existed within that field. And then all of a sudden it all just got shut down hard. Very interesting stuff. So you'd wonder if the government isn't involved in that. Because realistically, if Tim Burchett is saying that if there was, if we knew the truth about the aliens, we'd have a mental breakdown, like society would melt. Everyone would be up at night worrying. And I propose to you that aliens wouldn't make us keep us up at night. Even if they were farming us. I mean, sure, that would upset you. But what if these beings were things that lived in another dimension that you couldn't control if they saw you? They couldn't control if they were around you? What if you couldn't control if they read your thoughts or they were influencing your daily lives for reasons that we cannot and could not understand? What if we are somehow acting out their will? And the whole idea of like, we seem to be wide open for telepathic rating. How is that, you're utterly defenseless against these things, apparently. But there are defenses which occur, which if you look at the research are present, like animals, dogs and cats. They seem to give us some early warning. Everybody who gets abducted, the beings that get you on board are like, calm down, don't get angry, because I think when humans are angry, I don't mean like annoyed, I'm talking like full rage bait, Punisher level, psycho, they can't really control you because we have too much intensity. So that's interesting too. And then you've got the idea of like, if they can, there was the Tim Taylor, who, am I saying that name right? I think it was Tim Taylor. He was a guy who said that they had psychics that were monitoring people at NASA. Chris Bledsoe talked about this. And he said if you sing like a nursery rhyme in your head, they can't read your surface thoughts. Oh, really? Well, what if we turn that up to 11? What if we throw on some headphones and we got some Bang and Metallica going on in there? Or we got something heavy in there that really gets the pulse going? I don't know about you, but when I listen to some really good music that I'm really into, I get some really intense visions going on. So what happens if the old generator here, what if we're all being used as batteries and suddenly your battery becomes sentient? What if all of a sudden the machines that you're using to power your research decide they don't want to power your research anymore? Maybe we're that kind of biological AI that whatever they are created, and now they're getting a bit twitchy because we're not playing along with the program. So there's a big control protocol that's coming in and they're trying to keep us under wraps. They're kind of trying to keep us under control. Monkey's got a gun. All the things in the cage develop nuclear weapons. They're blowing holes in the super spectrum. I mean, you can't tell me that when we harness the power of a star and blow a hole on the planet and all of a sudden all these UFOs show up and they're like, whoa, 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 nice shooting, Tex. Why don't you step away from the large nukes? It's interesting. It's interesting. And the idea is that we're all like, I don't know, there's a lot of different theories, like Jason Giorgiani talks about how we're all being recycled and how our energy is somehow being harvested and reincarnation and all this kind of jazz. There's ancient religions that talk about this too. All these are kind of speculative, but they seem to all have the same kind of ring to them. And everyone wants to put their own name on it. Everybody wants to have their own style placed to it. And usually what they'll do is they'll look at the history, they get a general idea, and then they create their own sort of cult based around this, like these Heaven Gates guys. They probably had some entity they were talking to. Now, Chris Bledsoe was told that on Thanksgiving of 2026, I think it was 2026, but on Thanksgiving there was going to be a huge thing that happens, right? But this happens time and time again, where you have these people who are contactees, they get given information, they get given good information, then all of a sudden they start getting these weird information that's handed to them that kind of discredits everything that they see and that they do. Why is that? Why is that? And it seems to me like it's this bait and switch where these people are being used, where they're brought in, they're fed some information, and then they're fed information that is apparently false in order to discredit them. Yet, in that initial surge, you wind up getting a lot of people interested in it. Maybe that somehow makes people connect to the super spectrum. So they want more people to connect to the super spectrum, but they don't want them to have too many bearings because they don't want this to be a science we understand. But humans, we're wily, man. We will figure this stuff out one way or the other. We're going to get this nailed down. And here on Sean Hunt's Monsters, that's something that I intend to be following in a very real and physical way. Moving into this summer, God willing, I'll get a little bit more time and I'll be able to do more than just sit down here and talk to you about what's going on in, the relatively repetitive world of the paranormal. It seems like the same stories again and again, and the government is now running us around in circles talking about UFO disclosure this and UFO disclosure that, using it to serve their own agendas rather than, actually exposing that information. Yet we discover more and more with things like the Epstein files and these weird reports that are coming out that these powerful elite are doing very serious occult rituals. And they're somehow trying to communicate with beings that are beyond our realm. Beings that perhaps exist within this super spectrum, because where else would they be? And ever since the Witch of Endor in the Bible, man, almost all the magical stuff that people try to do is all information-based. That was a major bummer. Why aren't they teaching themselves how to throw fireballs? Well, maybe that's not on the equation. Maybe it's just about getting information. And now you've got these scientists trying to channel this stuff, trying to bring it in, trying to have visions, protocols that are used to contact these things. This isn't hard to figure out. This isn't hard to look at. But you have to have the mental resilience to look at this objectively. And you can't be looking for validation from other people online, not from me or from anyone else. You have to do your own research. Get into a field where you can find people where you can talk about these things. You can talk about your own research, or perhaps talking about your research may not be exactly what you need to do in the beginning. Maybe what you need to do is read a bunch of books. Because reading, of course, as we know, improves the mind. And when you feel ready for it, you want some recommendations, you want to talk to people about what you think you found, or maybe tell people stuff that you want to give to the system rather than make a statement and have everybody crap all over you. That's when you want to head over to the Discord server that we got set up. It's a small community right now. People who are all interacting with each other, trying to create some sort of a sense of community around this phenomenon. It's very, very difficult to understand everything that's going on. And it seems that the so-called scientific community are definitely gatekeeping all of this stuff. Charles Fort said that science was nothing more than imagination control. So why would they be so keen on imagination control? I'm not even sure that they're negative about it. I think that there's probably a pretty good reason. We just don't know what that is. Why do we tell kids not to play with Ouija boards? Because you're messing with powers we don't understand. But you're never going to figure anything out unless you mess with this stuff. And yeah, you could probably live your whole life and live, die, many people do, and never even look at this kind of information. But I think to me now, I can't not. And if you're like me, it's like this thing I can't even explain why I am as interested as I am. It just calls to me. And I want to understand it. I want to harness this somehow. And I'm sure that if you're like me, that's something that you need to look at. You're not helpless. All you have to do is try, meditate, read. Those two things alone will put you into a place that is so different from where the mainstream is right now. You begin to slowly realize that all these screens and all these shows and all these programs are just that. They're programs. They're trying to control you. They're trying to control you, and you need to escape the cage that they're placing around your mind. You can do it, but you got to choose to.